moderator today. Welcome to our 1010 webinar. Today we are very pleased to welcome around 200 attendees for our webinar, and the topic of today is standards and regulations. My colleague Francisco Verderamari, who is our Director of Strategic Partnerships, will explain you a bit more about this subject. Francisco, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and I'm very happy to see such a wide and a big audience here. So standards and regulations are clearly a topic of interest. We are very happy for that, and of course, standards are voluntary. This is also included in Regulation 1025 definition of a standard. But I would like to start first setting the horizontal and vertical family products framework for the regulations covering the safety of products. We have a part here in the upper part which is dealing with horizontal regulations. Then we have the product families, electrical, safety, machinery. We have vertical directives and regulations down, construction products regulation, and we have also some what we call the old approach directives, which are directives or regulations which include technical requirements in the text of the legal document. So in the horizontal part, we have the General Product Safety Directive, which is covering all products for some of the aspects and some products for all the aspects covered in the General Product Safety, which essentially says that products have to be safe. We have the responsibilities, the liabilities of the manufacturers, because in the European Union, in Europe, the responsibility of placing safe products relies on the manufacturer or its authorized representative. We have also a legal framework for accreditation, market surveillance, and also conditions for marketing of products and products which are also commercialized in a third member state legally. How to do in case this product is commercialized in another member state. So there is a complete package of regulations and directives covering products. Then we have the information procedure for regulations, which is the Directive 9834, which was modified by 9848, and then the Regulation 1025 of 2012 on European standardization. So we have a specific regulation covering European standardization, and we are going to dedicate some minutes to this regulation. Here you have the references in case you want to see details of some of the directives and regulations we were just referring to before. And we would like to start talking about standards. Standards, as I said before, they are voluntary documents. So standards are voluntary. They have a different nature to regulations. Regulations include requirements which are mandatory. And the European standards, not only by law, but because of our principles, have to be market-driven and voluntary. We have a certain number of values, which are the transparency, the openness, the inclusiveness, the consensus, the coherency, and the development dimension, which is also referred to, some of them they are referred to in the WTO TBT, the World Trade Organization Agreement for Technical Barriers to Trade. But in the case of European standards, we have a very high alignment with ISO and IC standards, which for us is one of the key essential elements in order to ensure that our markets remain open and fair for a fair treatment of all products. The important thing is that the products have the relevant quality, the necessary quality, they are safe. It doesn't matter where they come from. So I would like also to just spend 1 minute on the coherency. Coherency mainly means that the catalog of the 3 ISOs, CEN, CENELEC, and ETSI, are coherent. This means that there is only one standard covering one specific topic. The Regulation 1025 of 2012 entered into force in 2013, and it's covering mainly the following articles that we are showing on the screen. There are requirements for transparency, there are requirements for transparency of the work program and of draft standards. we have also requirements for allowing and motivating that all interested parties can participate in the standardization activities in European standardization, and there is a group of weaker stakeholders which are clearly identified by Regulation 1025, which are the consumers, the environmentalists, the social, which means the trade unions, and the small and medium enterprises. In Article 5 of Regulation 1025, we are strongly required to motivate their participation and give them relevant access to the processes, the standardization processes. In the case of SMEs, there is a specific article which is called Access of SMEs, which not only includes this requirement of access to our processes, but also to the results of standardization, because SMEs are the core of the industry and the businesses in the European Union. They are the clear majority of the businesses in Europe, so there are special measures for them. Regulation 1025 also considers the importance of having the participation of public authorities, market surveillance, and also considers research facilities and other educational and academia organizations in European standardization, as they give a lot of value and they also contribute to increase the quality of European standards. Okay, without more delay, we are going to start with the scope of the regulation. The scope of the regulation covers the collaboration between all the parties which are participating in the European standardization system, which are the European standard organizations, the national standard bodies, the member states, the European Commission. Of course, EFTA is not referred to, we have no references to EFTA because this is an EU regulation, but many EFTA countries are adopting the same requirements, so EFTA is also participating in the system as well. Regulation 1025 mainly covers the European standards and European standardization deliverables, which are giving support on one side to regulations and on the other side to public policies. Also, Regulation 1025 covers the identification of ICT technical specifications, not for policies, not for regulations, but for public procurement, which is the use that Regulation 1025 foresees for this kind of specifications. In addition, also, we have requirements for financing of European standardization and stakeholder participation in European standardization. It is very interesting. Regulation 1025 contains a number of definitions, and I'm going, of course, standards. It says it's a technical specification for repeated or continuous use. I'm just saying, I'm not reading, so I apologize if it's not exactly the same wording, but what I'm completely sure is that it says that its application, the application of standards, is not compulsory. So not compulsory means voluntary. Once again, standards are voluntary. And it is interesting that the Regulation 1025 defines European standard organizations as the European organizations which are developing standards. There is a reference to Annex 1 of Regulation 1025 where the ISOs are listed. We have national standard bodies. There is a reference that the member states will notify the national standard bodies of each country. It's very interesting. But the interesting thing is that when we go to international standard bodies, we have clearly identified ISO, IC, and ITU as the international standard organizations. And this is a very important difference of the European legal framework with other regions in the world. For us, there is no doubt. The only international standard organizations in Europe are ISO, IC, and ITU. Regulation 1025, we are going to see some examples of the annual Union Work Programme. We are also going to see some examples of standardization requests. And we are going to see the definition of harmonized standards. Also, we are going to see that Regulation 1025 foresees, in some cases, that standards do not cover sufficiently the essential requirements in a directive. There are some mechanisms called formal objections, which ensure that we start the process to revise the standard in order to ensure that the standard fully covers the essential requirements of the directives. I must tell you that this case is very, very, very minor. It's very minority if we compare with the number of standards which are giving support to the regulations. In this case is more than 4,000. So we have just 5 cases like this. So in reality it's something very minority. But of course the system is foreseen, the system is applied, and we revise the standards whenever necessary. That's very interesting. Regulation 1025 not only gives requirements to national standard bodies and European standard organizations on the transparency. The most evident cases are the work programs of the national standard bodies and the European standard organizations, and the draft standards, which we have to take into account any comment from any interested party, and the regulation sets target dates for taking into account such comments. But the interesting thing is that the Regulation 1025 also sets very important requirements for transparency on the use of standards in support of regulations to the European Commission. For example, the annual Union Work Programme, we are going to see it later, and the standardization requests, which are also publicly available. They are announced, so anybody can know. And this is very important because then anybody knows that in CEN, in such committee, we are going to develop a standard which in the future will give support to regulations or directives. So this means a previous ex ante notification, ex ante transparency, so anybody can participate if they want, if they wish so. That's the very important element, which is not exactly the same in other regions in the world. The Regulation 1025 takes very seriously requirements for market relevance. The European standards have to be market relevant. What does it mean, market? Market means the offer and the demand. In the offer, we normally have the product, the producers of the products or services, or the service providers. Also, we have in the offer we have the importers, the commercializers, but in the demand we have many times the users, which can be other companies, other businesses, or the consumers. And the consumers are a very weak element in the system because, of course, consumers, normally we are the majority, all of us, we are consumers, but we don't have, as organizations of consumers, they don't have really as many resources as other organizations which are defending other interests. Therefore, Regulation 1025 takes very seriously the obligation to ensure that not to ensure, but to motivate and to invite the participation of consumers, environmentalists, and trade unions. Also, the SMEs, which I said, normally when we think of an SME, there are certain limits to consider what is an SME or what is a big company. But when we think of SMEs, normally we think on an organization of 30, 40 people. Sometimes you have an SME, which is a micro SME of 1 person or 2 persons, and they are the majority, I must tell you. So in reality, the access of SMEs to standardization is a very important element. Also, another element which is very, very interesting is the participation of public authorities, in particular the national regulators, the national authorities which are setting national regulations in the context of their competences, because you have to know that for some things the competence is at European level, but for some other elements, some other regulatory areas, the national authorities are competent for making standards. So for us it's very important to have the national regulators, and as long as they refer to European standards, which in many cases are ISO and IC standards, then we are sure that we are not creating any barrier to trade. The fact that they would refer to national standard does not mean, of course, that they are creating barriers to trade, but complying with a European standard, which is an ISO or IC standard, for sure gives presumption that the standards do not create barriers to trade. Also, another element which is very important is the market surveillance. Market surveillance authorities have a role giving feedback on the use of the standard, and it's very important their participation in the European standardization processes. And also research, education, academia are invited and motivated to participate in European standardization. Okay, we were talking before about the transparency. The annual Union Work Programme is one of the elements for the transparency of Regulation 1025, as it identifies 1 year before, or even sometimes 1.5 years or 2 years before, the strategic lines, the strategic priorities for the European Commission to set in the future standardization requests to develop European standards, which will give support to European regulations or to public policies. So that's a very interesting element, and we are going to see some examples here in the presentation. You have 2 links. This is a communication published in 2013. You can see it here. It's a communication. It's number 561. And this is a communication. So normally this means that the Annual Union Work Programme 2014 is published in 2013. The Annual Union Work Programme 2015 was published in 2014. And the Annual Union Work Programme 2016, we are expecting that at the end of October or November, we will have the publication by the European Commission. So let's go to these examples. And then, apologies because I'm going to move the screen, which is something I like very much, and I hope it doesn't create too many problems. We go to the website of DG GROW. So what you have to do is to type DG or European Commission, DG GROW. I don't know what happened. I had a small issue with the website. So we have a website of the European Commission, and then you can see that one of the first tabs is Single Market and Standards. So you can see that the European Commission takes very seriously standards as one instrument giving support to the application of regulations and policies. If we go to European Standards and we click, we will go to this website of the DG GROW. It's a specific website which makes link to CEN, CENELEC and ETSI. And down, very interesting, you have on this website standardization policy, key players, notification system. If we click in notification system, we have links to the Annual Union Work Programme of 2013 and to the Annual Union Work Programme of 2015. Sorry, when I said 2013, I mean it was published in 2013, but it's 2014, and the Work Programme of 2015, which was published in 2014. So what is interesting of that? Why you are showing us this Annual Union Work Programme? Well, we are going to go to one example, so we can open the Annual Union Work Programme for 2015. It's a communication from the European Commission, has the normal format of a communication. And then here you can start appreciating areas where the Commission is going to issue standardization requests. Waste recycling, postal services. So that's an intention, declared intention of the Commission to start doing that. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to have a standardization request on anything, because it may happen that some of them are not approved. But at least the Commission is saying this is the way we want to go. And it's very interesting. Child safety, safety of consumer products, tobacco products. We are going to stop in one interesting one. Fiber composition of textiles products. So in 2014, the European Commission said that by 2015, they were intending to start standardization requests for textiles with regard to finished textile products for the integration of non-textile elements in the textile products. So this is the information we had in 2015. And why I'm showing you that is because we are going to see now what happened with that intention, which was published in 2014. So here we have the link to the communication, which is the Annual Union Work Programme of 2015. This is what I showed you before. So it's the fiber composition of textile products. What will happen, we will show you, because After this publication of the Annual Union Work Programme, the Commission issues something called a standardization request. So for the time being, we don't have a standardization request on that, but they are developing a future standardization request, which will request us to develop standards before a certain day. And then normally there is the, well, normally no, there is the clear identification if the standard is going to be a harmonized standard, this means supporting a regulation, or it's going to be a European standard supporting a public policy. Once we receive the standardization request, the ISOs, CEN, CENELEC and ETSI, have 1 month to accept or reject, because standardization requests in the past they were called mandates, but Regulation 1025 changed the terminology on purpose, because it's not a mandate. We are not obliged to accept a standardization request, so this means it's a request. CEN and CENELEC can evaluate in their system if there is enough support from the market to develop such standards. And then if there is support, then we will say yes. If there is not enough support, then we will say no. That's the way the mechanism works. Going back to the Annual Union Work Programme, you remember one of the elements was the preparation. Let's go down before, sorry, I'm just, I know I'm moving slides, but I prefer to be a little bit more active in this thing. We had in the Annual Union Work Programme, fiber composition of textile products. We didn't have much information at that time, only that it was the integration of non-textile elements. But now, when we go to the website of the Commission, we see that they want to issue a standardization request, so it's a draft standardization request, for garments and ensembles of garments with integrated smart textiles. So this means they are going to integrate elements, for example, for firemen or for other people which are under a risky situation, to know that the vital constants of this person are completely under control, even in dangerous situations. So now we know, and where can we find this pre-announcement of future standardization requests? Here you have the link, but again, if we go to the website of the European Commission, close this, in the notification system, we have possible future standardization requests. So possible future, you can imagine, it's eventual possible future, but yes, in reality what we are saying is that the Commission has the intention to launch a standardization request. This standardization request will go first to a committee which is composed by member states, and the Commission is chairing it, which is called the Committee on Standards. And the Committee on Standards will approve or reject first the issuing of the standardization request. So after the committee, if the committee says, yes, we want to issue such a standardization request to the ISOs, then we will have 1 month to say yes or no. Okay? But this one, for the time being, the garments and ensembles of garments with integrated smart textiles is still a draft standardization request, which was initiated in October 2015. And of course, if we click it, we click on the link, we have all the information about the draft standardization request. So I invite you to do it. So it's a clear identification. It's in the field of textiles, and also there is a reference to Regulation 1025 because this is prepared. It's a draft standardization request following the requirements of the Regulation 1025 for European standardization. ETSI, CEN and CENELEC, because it's a smart textile, so the three organizations are referred to in this draft standardization request. So, we are back to our presentation. Here you have the links of the possible future standardization requests, which is very interesting to keep on the radar to see what's going on. Okay, so we receive the standardization request. The standardization request is approved, accepted by CEN and CENELEC or ETSI. We start working using our normal procedures. There is no difference between a draft standard, which will give support. Well, there are some differences, but you cannot see them in the normal processes of the standard. So they are in the same committee, they are developed with the same experts, they are developed with the same interested parties. So a harmonized standard or a mandated standard or standard developed under standardization request is not different to just another standard which is developed by CEN or CENELEC. The thing is that at a certain moment, CEN, CENELEC or ETSI, before the target date, which is set in the draft standardization request, they developed the European standard, and the standard is offered to the Commission. And then Regulation 1025, the Article 10 says the EC, together with the ESOs, the EC is the European Commission, together with the ESOs are CEN, CENELEC and ETSI, shall assess the compliance of the document with its initial request. So this means once we develop this standard for non-textile garments in the textile, the Commission will check, okay, what we requested you was that, to take into account this requirement, this requirement, this requirement. Is that requirement covered in the standard? Yes, no. Yes. Okay, in this case then we can use the standard in support of the regulation or the public policy. And it's very curious because the regulation doesn't say the Commission can publish the reference. No. If the Commission starts all this process, issues an annual Union work program, a pre-standardization request, issues the standardization request, we accept the standardization request, we start developing standards with thousands of experts all over Europe working through the national committees and through the European committees. If we issue a document, a European standard, which covers the requirements which were in the draft standardization request, and in the case that it's supporting regulations, the Commission shall, this is what the regulation says, the EC shall publish the reference in the official journal. Because imagine moving all these things, spending so much money of experts and business interest, and then the Commission says, no, I'm not going to publish it. No, sorry, Regulation 1025 says very clearly that the Commission shall publish the reference in the official journal. Of course, where a harmonized standard satisfies the requirements of the Union harmonization legislation. And what is a harmonized standard? Harmonized standard normally is when we have a European Commission which together with the Parliament and the Council have approved a regulation or a directive. So under this regulation or directive, the Commission, following the procedure in Regulation 1025, launches an invitation, which we call standardization request, to develop harmonized standards. Then CEN and CENELEC work, they accept the standardization request, start working. We develop such a standard. This standard has been demonstrated to comply with the requirements in the standardization request and the requirements in the regulation. Then the Commission publishes the reference in the official journal of the European Union. And in many cases, depending on the peligrosity of the product, it provides presumption of conformity. We have more than 4,000. We cannot give you the figure because every week we have a new publication of standards, of references to standards. So the figure is increasing all the time. But we have above 4,000 harmonized standards, which is approximately from 20 to 30% of our catalog is supporting regulations and policies. And then we said, okay, yes, but sometimes the experience shows that some requirements are not covered sufficiently. What happens in this case? Well, Regulation 1025, any member state can issue a formal objection on a European standard. And now I'm remembering, for example, it can be of any nature, of any type. This year, for example, we had a very interesting notification. It was a formal objection from the Cyprus member state because the water heaters, which are the kettles, the household appliances which are used to heat the water. I use them many times when I have to boil spaghetti very fast. I just boil water in the kettle and then I put it on the pan just to boil, but then it's boiling, so I can prepare my spaghetti faster. That's very good. But I never put the spaghetti inside the kettle. I just put water, and the water then I put it on the... Well, some countries, they use the water heaters to heat other kind of products. And for example, in the case of Turkish coffee, or Cyprus coffee, or other kinds of coffees which are prepared in many countries, you have that this liquid expands. And when you have a kettler and you have a liquid that expands, sometimes the heat can, the heat of the liquid which is expanding goes out of the kettler and then the consumer gets hurt. Okay, so the Cyprus member state said electricity produces heat produces the effect of expanding this coffee. The manufacturers have to take measures that this doesn't happen. So there is a clear indication that only water can be used, and in case it's coffee, then you have to have additional measures. So now we have to revise our standard to consider this element, because we have a formal objection, which means this standard on water heaters does not provide presumption of conformity. So the manufacturers have to take additional measures to demonstrate the safety. So that's just an example, just to show you that how interesting is the world of standards. So anytime now when you have a Cyprus coffee next time, or you have a Turkish coffee in Turkey, then you can see that the standards are providing you all the necessary safety. So the Commission, in this case, said, okay, we are going to maintain the reference, but we say that this reference will not give you presumption of conformity. So the standard does not give you presumption of conformity according to this requirement of the Low Voltage Directive. So the manufacturers have to take additional measures. Well, just to say that Regulation 1025 also gives some reporting requirements. We have to report to the Commission, the consumer representatives, the environmental organizations and trade unions also have to report to the European Commission if they are receiving money of the European Commission, in this case, for doing their own their mission. And the European Commission also has to report to the Parliament and the Council on certain elements of this regulation every certain number of years. Okay, we are at the end of our presentation. You may think it's a lot of information, but the good news is everything is on the website, everything is there, so you can find it very easily. We have the website of the CEN and CENELEC, the website of CEN, the website of CENELEC. You have also the European Commission, we saw it, DG GROW, how to find the information. So all these elements you can regularly check and then see how the work, which is of a standard supporting regulations, is going on. We have just 1 or 2 minutes to refer to a guide which is publicly available on the website of CEN and CENELEC. So it's called Guide 30, which gives recommendations and best practices on how to use standards in support of European policies and regulations. We know that there is an ISO and IC guide on how to support standards and regulations. Of course, our guide is compatible with that guide, but there are certain specificities in the European market that require that we should develop something more specific on how to use European standards. And this is a very interesting document. Of course, it recognizes the difference between standards, they are voluntary, standards are voluntary, and the legislation which contain mandatory requirements. Which is the preferred way to refer to standards? The indirect referencing. And then you may ask, what is indirect referencing? Well, indirect referencing means, we go back, the regulation sets the requirements that the products have to comply with. They are generic requirements. For example, products must be safe. Or the electricity that all the effects of the electricity in the product, well, it's not written like this. I'm just saying, just for you to give you an example. It's the electricity may not cause any harm to the user. For example, this could be one requirement. So these requirements are the what, but not the how. When we develop a standard, following a standardization request, we develop standards which show not the how, but a way to how. So this means the standards are voluntary, you always have other means, but we give you examples and good practices on how to comply with these requirements. So once you use this, then you get the presumption of conformity if, according to the periodicity of the product, this presumption of conformity can be guaranteed. So this means European standards give you particular ways to comply with the regulation. And why I was saying that? Because I said indirect referencing. What is indirect referencing? Okay. In the regulation, you don't have any reference to the European standard 12345. In this case, for example, the electric kettles, we don't have any reference to the EN 60335, which is household appliances, and then there is a specific part for electric kettles. We don't have a reference in the regulation, in the corresponding regulation, in this case, the low voltage directive. What we have is a series of communications which are published twice per year, 3 times per year, by the Commission, which in the official journal, which contain the references. So this means in the regulation you don't have the reference, you have it in a communication which is published regularly. Which is the advantage of that? The legislative process is normally very long because it needs a lot of consensus with member states, with the council, with the parliament. So imagine any time if we would have the reference in the text, which is called direct referencing, then anytime we want to update the reference, we would have to start the legislative process again to change the references. But what the regulation says is the Commission will be able to publish a list when they consider. So anytime they publish the list is updated. So this means the indirect referencing is in the official journal and not in the legislative text. So that's for us a good practice. Why? Because it allows, first of all, the reference has to be voluntary. So there are other ways to comply with the regulation. Of course, you don't grant presumption of conformity, you don't benefit from presumption of conformity, you have to demonstrate. So if you don't have presumption, you have to demonstrate. But in this case, it's very interesting that we have an indirect referencing of a dated standard. So this means there is a clear certainty on which is the standard that gives you presumption of conformity. So for the manufacturers, for the importers, for the consumers, for everybody, even for the authorities that have to control the market, and market control is a bad expression, I must say, to take a surveillance of the market, to make a surveillance of the market, that's the correct way. But in the case, for example, of customs, they also have a control that the standard is complied properly, and that if someone wants to get presumption of conformity, it is doing it with the right standard. So that's for us our preferred model. Just to say that European standards, the European standard organizations are not co-regulators. That's something I want to clarify. European standard organizations, we are not co-regulators, but we help the business operators, the consumers, the authorities to work together in a committee and set the particular requirements that can ensure or can facilitate the fulfillment of the regulation. So this means that European standards help to co-regulate. So this means all the different parties, they contribute to ensure that the products are safe with particular requirements that the products and the services have to comply with. We are at the end. We just consumed a few minutes more than 30 minutes, but I think it was better to be slow and to go to all the examples we wanted to show you. Key learning process points. Standards are mandatory? No, standards are voluntary. The standards are voluntary, and according to Regulation 1025, they are market-driven. They have to be market-driven. Standards follow transparent, accessible, inclusive processes, and standards are coherent. Regulation 1025 establishes a way to collaborate between the EC-EFTA, the European Commission, and EFTA Secretariat with the European standard organizations to develop standards through what we call standardization requests. And then, after the standardization request that has been approved by the ISOs, then we start doing standards, we prepare the standards, and the standards, if they comply with anything that they had to comply, then can support regulations or public policies. And this is very interesting. Standards are voluntary, standards are highly aligned with international standards, so they are a tool not only for competitiveness of the European companies in the European market, but also for the global competitiveness of European companies. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paco.